traveled quite a bit before I came to Karmê Chöling in 1990, and as a farm boy, I grew up on a farm in the Netherlands. I was always looking for places in the world. I traveled for 3 years around the world and looked for places where I thought I could start my own farm. And saw beautiful landscapes everywhere, in India, in China, in Japan, in Canada, but never felt the urge to settle down. And when I came to Vermont, something shifted and I said, this is not just beautiful, this feels healthy, and I could settle down here. So that's why I actually landed on this particular land.
Pay homage to the mother lineage. Your robe is soaked in water. Your hair is elegant and airy. Your perfume is exquisite. From a grain of barley dropped on the ground by seeming accident, great prosperity has sprung. Your milk feeds the nation. We like the crescent moon on your hair. We emulate your openness and bounty. You speak softly, but your command carries weight. Please do not stop loving us. We bathe within a grove of bamboo. Please help us to become gentle and tough.
This time of year we plant literally thousands of flowers out in this garden, bedding plants. And here is an example of a bed we planted yesterday. There's still one plant to go in this little space here. But what is so nice if you have a healthy soil is that your soil is really soft. You can just, with your hand, dig a hole. I could go half a foot deep if I wanted to, and put the plant in there. And if your soil is kind of has little organic matter in it, the soil is much harder, it tends to be more compacted and is much harder to work with. But so since we put compost here very regularly, this is really nice and easy soil to plant, and plants will really take off. Like these irises here, growing very happy and healthily.
Part of cultivating is organizing nature in a way. So there's some sense of harmony between letting things just grow and also for example, the flower beds. Like that's a project that we're working on right now, and there's a lot of discernment about which things to keep in and which to leave out, and a lot of plants that could be seen as weeds that actually are kind of beautiful. So we leave some of them in and take some of them out, and there's definitely an art to that, knowing how to sort of balance the colors and make the flower beds beautiful. Even when I'm not here, I often visit the garden, and it kind of comes back to that feeling of home. It's like my heart has kind of learned what it feels like to be in this place to such an extent that I carry it with me even when I'm not here, and sometimes visit the garden in my dreams. But I learned so much from it. I mean, on any given day, I can really see where my mind is at by how I'm viewing the garden and the ebbs and flow of the season. yeah, just the different qualities of my mind, getting really busy and fixated on how much we have to get done versus a day when it's just breezy and feels really easy to just relax. So it's a really good friend in that way. It's always showing me where I'm at.
Our health, our own health, and the health of the animals that we would feed with food depends on the health of a soil. If the soil becomes dead and lifeless, it will affect the food that we eat, and it will therefore affect how, how it will affect our own health. So I've been studying for the last 20, 30 years how to improve that soil and what are the qualities of soil I can directly affect. And so one of the parts is growing cover crops, but that's only a small part of the overall strategies that I use. Another part is that you have a constant, that soils stay covered, not just with cover crops, but also when one crop is taken out of the soil, is harvested, that you have another crop growing. So covered soil will foster healthy soil life. And open, empty soil, like you see in so many modern mega farms, basically makes that soil dead. So a big part of the strategy is also to have constantly one crop after another. And if there is an open space in the cover, in the crop rotation, I'll plant a cover crop. And if there is no open space, just one vegetable follows the other. And some places in the garden will have wildflowers growing. Like we just behind the camera right now, there is a just seeded wildflower bed that will be full of flowers coming in about a month from now, and lots of pollinators will be attracted, and they will help pollinate different plants here in the garden, like the cucurbits, cucumbers, summer squash, winter squash, tomatoes, etc. So biodiversity is the other real key thing. If you would have just one crop growing in the soil, you get a certain type of microorganisms that can live off those plants. But if you have many different plants, then you get many more different microorganisms. So you really try to have a good variety of plants growing at the same time. Like some of these cover crops will have between 3 and 9 different species growing. Some farmers are experimenting with 20 or even more varieties in one cover crop. So you get an enormous diversity. For a small scale like this, that's a little challenging, but definitely something to aspire to. So biodiversity is something I look for constantly. And so a big part of what those microorganisms do, because we don't see how essential they are to our health. We, for a long time, didn't even know they existed. Once we become aware that they exist and start studying what they're doing, we realize that they actually create what is called, some people call it the soil sponge or the soil carbon sponge. So bacteria, fungi, as I said, protozoa, nematodes, earthworms, they all create these very intricate pathways in the soil with air spaces. It's almost like creating cathedral structures with open spaces where different organic substances like sugars and proteins, different kind of glues, hold the soil particles together so they don't wash away, so they don't get compacted. If you take away those bacteria and fungi, you get a soil that gets very quickly compacted, and very quickly in a drought it dries up and the wind blows it away. If you have a heavy rain and there are no microorganisms, that soil will just wash away, and then the water very quickly will just stay standing on top of the soil. So if you have a good alive soil, that soil can handle bucket loads of water. Suddenly you can handle a 2, 3, 4-inch rain that falls in 1 or 2 hours, and the soil is not going to puddle up. So that's what we're aiming for.
I started working in the garden right in the beginning of the spring, in March, at the end of March, and this whole place has really come alive.
Things grow fast here, don't they?
Surprisingly, yeah. I really wasn't in pace with how nature worked and how quickly it went, but it does. These bloomed up within a couple of weeks of seeding them. We've harvested them 6 or 7, 8 times, and now they're at the end of their life. I lived at Karmê Chöling 8 months. Today's my last day here.
Wow. And so when you're working in a garden at a meditation center, I mean, do you tend to do any contemplation out here?
So much. I mean, it parallels so many different things. Like right now, as I pick this spinach, I try to get the ones that are most mature and ready to go at their perfect time. It's about being with the plant and seeing what it needs and taking from it appropriately, because you can't take everything. You got to leave some of it so it can keep regrowing. I spent about 3 days pruning the blueberry bushes. That was my favorite activity here.
What do you
And
like about that?
I got to spend about 20 minutes with each plant, making hundreds of micro decisions about, if I do this, how will the energy flow to the rest of the plant? How will it enable it to become the fullest expression of itself? And personally in my life at the time, it paralleled so much of the work that I was doing on myself and pruning the things that weren't working anymore and changing into the fullest expression, the energy, the potential energy that I have in myself to grow into. And having a practice that mirrors me in such a gentle and kind way was really, really special.
I've been here a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you came here as a garden volunteer?
Yeah, I'm here till August as a garden volunteer.
And what do you think of the garden so far?
It's lovely. I mean, I'm still sort of feeling into it. I've done some community gardening these past few years, sort of as I've developed a more consistent Dharma practice, sort of in tandem or in concert with that. I've sort of developed a real interest in cultivating the land and a sort of practice of applied ecology, you might call it. So I've helped out at some community gardens, including in my hometown, helping my mother get one off the ground, doing some mutual aid work around gardening. So it's been I've been able to really connect with a knowledge base that I think is sort of intrinsic in our human nature that we've perhaps lost a connection with. The ability to work with the land and work with its rhythms and work in common cultivation of the land, and I feel like there's a sense of urgency to that work in terms of, you know, the many crises of our time, ecological and climate-wise. So it feels like reconnecting with something very essential to our human nature. I feel like many people operate with the assumption that humans are antagonists to nature, which has been an idea I've sort of been working to dispel in my own work, just kind of learning to tend the land and learning that we are in and of nature.
I want to introduce you to a term that many of you probably have never heard of. It's called land ethics. And land ethics is a term that was coined by Aldo Leopold, perhaps in the 1940s, around the 1940s. He wrote a book called The Sand Almanac. And in it he talks about how if we don't take care of the land and abuse the land stops caring for us. Now, from a Buddhist point of view, I've given this a little bit of thought, and I really feel that as Buddhist and Shambhala Buddhist, we don't come from the point of view of judging each other when we abuse the land, but more from a wisdom point of view. So I want to come from the point of view of the 6 paramitas, where we are generous to the land, where we have patience with the land, but also with ourselves and with each other, where there is a certain level of exertion and where there is a meditative discipline. But key to all of it is to use wisdom to see deeper than just the surface of how we deal with the world, how we work with the land. So from a wisdom point of view of land care, we really continuously look and ask, how can I help the land so that the land gets richer, more balanced, more supported, and so that the larger ecology can thrive. So that it helps with the bird population, with the animal population, and see the complex interactions of all the different species and trees and plants. So land ethics really goes back from this point of view to looking deeply into the landscape and asking yourself, how can I help?